In the misty, untamed corners of the world, a warrior culture emerged that would shape the course of history. Their ships carved through the oceans, their axes struck fear across kingdoms, and their sagas still echo through the centuries. They were the Vikings, unyielding adventurers, relentless conquerors, and legendary seafarers. For centuries, they roamed the seas, from the icy waters of the north to the sun-kissed shores of distant lands. But behind their reputation for terror lies a complex story of exploration, innovation, and transformation. This is the story of the Viking Age, a journey of survival, conquest, and cultural legacy that would shape the very foundation of the world as we know it. Join us as we uncover the history, the myths, and the legacy of the Norsemen, an age that will never be forgotten. The Viking Age is said to have begun in the late 8th century. Before the first raids, the people of Scandinavia, what we now know as Denmark, Norway, and Sweden, lived in relative isolation. Life was tough, shaped by a harsh environment where winters were long and summers short. The Scandinavian landscape was filled with dense forests, towering mountains, and fjords that carved through the land, offering both protection and a natural highway to the sea. But beneath the rugged exterior, these Norse societies were far from primitive. They were a people of great skill and ingenuity. They built longships that could navigate both the open seas and the narrowest of rivers. They created a complex social structure with chieftains and warriors at the top, and farmers, traders, and craftsmen supporting the economy below. The Norse gods, mythologies, and sagas, passed down orally for generations, were an integral part of their identity. The Scandinavian world before the Viking Age was one of relative peace. In the 700s, most of the people were farmers, living in small villages or isolated homesteads. These communities were often close-knit, and survival depended on cooperation. The harsh winters made it crucial for people to stockpile food, raise livestock, and grow grain. Yet, even as these farmers tilled their lands, they were not immune to the desire for more. Among the villagers were those with a different ambition, a desire for wealth and glory, the warriors. Over time, the Viking leaders, known as chieftains, began to organize their tribes more effectively. They were skilled in both battle and trade, forming the backbone of what would soon become a ruthless and effective fighting force. The Viking Age is often thought to begin with one pivotal moment, the raid on the monastery at Lindisfarne in 793 AD. The Viking assault on the holy site off the northeastern coast of England was brutal, swift, and unexpected. The monastery was a place of learning, culture, and religious significance, making it an enticing target for the Viking raiders. On that fateful day, the Vikings arrived like phantoms, emerging from the mist in their longships. With their fearsome warriors, clad in iron helmets and wielding axes and swords, they attacked swiftly and without mercy. The monks, unprepared for the assault, were caught off guard. The monastery was ransacked, and its treasures were looted. But more than material wealth was taken that day. The raid on Lindisfarne sent shockwaves through Europe, marking the beginning of a new and terrifying era. It was not just the wealth or the violence that made the Viking Age so momentous. It was the sheer audacity of the raids themselves. Vikings weren't just raiders, they were adventurers, explorers, and traders. They ventured far beyond the shores of their homeland, navigating uncharted waters to reach distant lands. At the heart of the Viking Age was the longship, an engineering marvel of the time. These ships were lightweight, fast, and incredibly versatile. Able to navigate both the open ocean and narrow rivers, they allowed the Vikings to reach places no one else could. The longships were designed to carry both warriors and cargo, making them ideal for raiding, trading, and exploring. With these vessels, the Vikings would set out on incredible journeys that would span thousands of miles. The early Viking raids were often short, brutal, and opportunistic. But as the years went on, the Vikings began to establish more permanent footholds in the lands they had raided. They would set up settlements, often around rivers or trading hubs, where they could trade goods, recruit more followers, and expand their influence. The first Vikings to raid outside Scandinavia were not the giant armies of later years. They were small bands of warriors, led by chieftains and kings, who were hungry for both plunder and adventure. But by the early 9th century, Viking raids had grown larger and more organized. The Anglo-Saxon kingdoms of England, the Franks in France, and the Carolingian Empire all found themselves under attack from these marauding Norsemen. And it wasn't just England that felt the fury of the Viking raids. The Irish coastlines, the coasts of France, and even the Mediterranean were not safe from the onslaught of the Viking warriors. The great cities of Paris, Dublin, and even Constantinople would soon feel the wrath of Viking invasions. The Viking raids were not random acts of barbarism. They were the product of a society that valued strength, valor, and the spoils of war. To the Vikings, raiding was not just a means of survival, it was a way of life. Their sagas and stories were filled with the exploits of mighty warriors who went off to seek their fame and fortune in distant lands. But while the Vikings were fierce warriors, they were also deeply connected to their gods and beliefs. The Norse pantheon of gods, led by Odin, Thor, and Freya, played a central role in their lives. The Vikings believed that the gods controlled their fate, and in battle, they prayed for favor and victory. The Vikings were also known for their practice of berserkergang, where warriors would enter a trance-like fury before battle, fighting with a terrifying intensity that struck fear into their enemies. The Viking gods and their beliefs also influenced their view of the afterlife. Warriors hoped to be honored in death, to join the ranks of Odin's chosen warriors in Valhalla, where they would fight and feast until the end of days. This belief in an afterlife where honor and valor were rewarded pushed many Viking warriors to live and fight with an intensity few could match. As the 9th century progressed, the Vikings began to leave a permanent mark on the world. The raids were no longer just about plunder, they were about carving out territories and kingdoms. The Vikings would go on to establish settlements and trading outposts in places as far-flung as Iceland, Greenland, and even North America. Their interactions with the local populations were not always violent. In many cases, the Vikings would trade goods, intermarry with local peoples, and even assimilate into the cultures they encountered. The Vikings were not just warriors, they were merchants, explorers, and settlers, leaving behind a legacy that would last for centuries. The Viking Age, once thought to be just a time of raids and pillaging, soon revealed itself to be something much more complex. What began as opportunistic raids from small bands of Norsemen soon evolved into full-fledged campaigns of conquest and settlement. The Vikings were not merely marauders, they were explorers, traders, and settlers. They came in search of land, riches, and glory, but as their influence grew, they began to build empires, establish kingdoms, and by the end of the 9th century, the Vikings had firmly established themselves as a force to be reckoned with. Their longships were no longer just tools of raiding, they became instruments of expansion. The Vikings were no longer simply attacking isolated monasteries. They were carving out territories and establishing power bases that would have long-lasting consequences. One of the first and most significant targets of Viking expansion was England. In the early 9th century, the Anglo-Saxon kingdoms that ruled England were under attack from various directions. Yet it was the Viking invasions that would change the course of English history forever. The Anglo-Saxon kings, unprepared for the full force of Viking raids, began to lose ground. By the year 865, a large Viking army, known as the Great Heathen Army, landed in East Anglia. Led by the sons of the legendary Viking king Ragnar Lothbrok, these warriors sought to conquer the land and claim it for themselves. The Great Heathen Army began its campaign by defeating the Anglo-Saxon forces in battle after battle. Their relentless assaults were devastating, and the Anglo-Saxon kingdoms quickly fell one by one. The Vikings weren't just interested in plunder, they sought to rule. By 871, the Vikings had captured the Kingdom of York, which became the heart of their power in England. The city would serve as the capital of the Viking kingdom of Jorvik, which lasted for nearly a century. But the Vikings didn't stop there. They expanded their influence into other regions of Europe. In what is now France, Viking raiders attacked the Carolingian Empire and its territories. The Vikings, led by the fearsome warlord Rollo, famously captured the city of Paris in 845. In exchange for peace, the Frankish king Charles the Bald granted Rollo land in Normandy, where the Vikings would settle and eventually become powerful rulers. This would set the stage for the creation of the Duchy of Normandy, a crucial player in the events that would shape medieval Europe. The Vikings' success was not just due to their ferocity in battle, but also their adaptability. In many cases, once they had conquered a region, they didn't destroy it. they integrated into the local culture. In Normandy, for example, the Viking settlers intermarried with the local Frankish population. Over time, they adopted Christianity and the language of the locals. The once pagan Norsemen were transformed into a powerful Christian dynasty, laying the foundation for what would eventually become one of the most influential regions in medieval Europe. But it was not only the West that felt the Viking expansion. To the east, the Vikings, now known as the Varangians, made their way down the rivers of Eastern Europe. The waterways of Russia, Ukraine, and the Balkans were used by the Norsemen to navigate vast distances, reaching as far as Constantinople, the heart of the Byzantine Empire. The Varangians played a significant role in the formation of early Russian states. The legendary Rurik, a Varangian leader, is said to have founded the Rurik dynasty in the 9th century, becoming the first ruler of the Kievan Rus. The Vikings, through their trade, military prowess, and settlement, helped shape the culture and governance of this early Russian kingdom. But perhaps the most surprising aspect of Viking expansion in the East was their connection with the Byzantine Empire. The Vikings, particularly the Varangians, became mercenaries in the service of the Byzantine emperors. The elite soldiers known as the Varangian Guard, made up mostly of Norsemen, became the personal bodyguards of the Byzantine emperors. This close relationship between the Vikings and the Byzantines would have a profound impact on both cultures. The Varangians in Constantinople were known for their fierce loyalty and battle skills. They were among the most elite soldiers in the Byzantine army, and their role as protectors of the emperor became legendary. In return, they received gold, land, and privileges that elevated their status to that of nobility within the Byzantine Empire. This unusual relationship marked a significant chapter in Viking history, showing that the Norsemen were more than just raiders. They were respected warriors who could navigate complex political landscapes. As the Viking Age progressed, the Vikings' influence continued to spread. While they had already established settlements in the British Isles, Francia, and Eastern Europe, their thirst for exploration and conquest led them even further afield. In the West, the Vikings would eventually reach the shores of North America, a place that would later be known as Vinland. In the early 11th century, Leif Erikson, the son of Eric the Red, led an expedition to North America. Erikson and his crew landed in what is today Newfoundland, Canada, marking the first known European contact with the Americas. The Vikings built settlements in the region, though their stay was short-lived due to conflicts with indigenous peoples and the harsh environment. Despite this, the Viking exploration of North America remains one of the most extraordinary chapters in their history, a testament to their seafaring abilities and their desire to explore the unknown. The Vikings' expansion, however, was not without consequences. The very power they had built would soon face internal challenges. As Viking kingdoms grew and more settlers moved into conquered lands, conflicts arose. Rival Viking chieftains and kings fought for supremacy, and eventually, the rise of new powers began to threaten the dominance of the Norsemen. The once united front of the Viking warriors began to fracture. The internal struggles among Viking rulers marked the beginning of the decline of the Viking Age, but it would take centuries for this era to come to a full end. As the Viking Age reached its peak, the very same qualities that had propelled the Norsemen to power began to sow the seeds of their decline. The Vikings were no longer simply raiders and explorers. They had built empires, formed kingdoms, and integrated with the societies they had once conquered. Yet, as the world around them changed, so too did the fate of the Viking world. The 10th and 11th centuries marked a period of transformation for the Norsemen. What had once been an unstoppable tide of raids, settlements, and conquests gradually slowed down. The Viking warriors, who had once roamed the seas with unyielding ferocity, found themselves facing new challenges that even their might could not overcome. One of the most significant changes came with the rise of Christianity across Scandinavia. The early Vikings had followed their own pagan beliefs, worshipping gods like Odin, Thor, and Freya. But as the Viking Age wore on, Christian missionaries began to make inroads into the Viking territories. The Christian faith was not just a spiritual movement, it was deeply intertwined with the political and social changes sweeping through Europe. Kings and chieftains who had once resisted Christianity began to convert not only for spiritual reasons but for political ones as well. The Christian church was a powerful institution, and alliances with Christian kingdoms in Europe offered access to wealth, resources, and diplomatic relations that were too valuable to ignore. The conversion of King Harald Bluetooth of Denmark in the 10th century was a pivotal moment. Harald's embrace of Christianity signaled a shift that would echo throughout the Scandinavian world. Harald Bluetooth's conversion to Christianity marked the beginning of the end for the Old Norse religion. As more Viking leaders converted to Christianity, their followers did as well. The sacred sites of the old gods were abandoned, and the grand pagan rituals of the Vikings gradually faded into history. In their place, Christian churches and monasteries were built, and the cultural heart of Scandinavia shifted from the old ways to the new faith. This religious transformation was not just symbolic, it had real consequences for Viking society. The Vikings, who had once been known for their independence and warrior culture, now found themselves part of a larger, more organized Christian Europe. Christian kings were expected to rule according to divine law, and many Viking rulers, once free from such constraints, now had to navigate the political realities of the Christian monarchies. With the spread of Christianity came the establishment of feudal systems and the growth of centralized monarchies, both of which weakened the decentralized and clan-based Viking society. Viking warriors, once free to raid and plunder at will, now found themselves subject to the authority of kings and bishops. The very traits that had made the Vikings formidable, their independence, their ability to act as autonomous warlords, began to clash with the emerging political system, but the Viking world did not fall solely because of religious changes. The rise of larger, more powerful kingdoms and the shift in warfare also played a role in the decline. By the 11th century, the Viking raids that had once struck terror into the hearts of Europe were becoming less frequent. The Norsemen, with their long ships and axe-wielding warriors, were being replaced by professional armies and fortified cities. The development of castles and fortified towns made the Vikings' raiding tactics less effective, as their targets were now harder to breach. The rise of professional soldiers and defensive fortifications rendered the old Viking ways of warfare increasingly obsolete. The Vikings had once relied on their speed, their surprise, and their overwhelming numbers. But as the kingdoms they raided grew stronger and more fortified, the Vikings found themselves facing opponents who were better equipped and better organized. At the same time, Viking society was changing from within. As Viking settlements in England, Ireland, and Normandy grew, they began to blend with the local populations. Over time, these once pagan, warrior-focused societies began to adopt the customs, laws, and structures of their new homes. In Normandy, the Viking settlers had become powerful landowners, with many of them adopting the feudal system and becoming part of the nobility. In England, the Norsemen, who had once ruled parts of the kingdom, found themselves becoming part of the broader Anglo-Saxon society. The Viking kingdom of Jorvik, once a thriving center of Viking power in northern England, eventually fell to Anglo-Saxon kings in the 11th century. The rise of King Ethelstan, who consolidated control over much of England, marked the final blow to Viking dominance in the British Isles. The Vikings were not just a force of destruction, they were a catalyst for change. They brought with them new ideas, new technologies, and new ways of living that reshaped the world. Their legacy lives on in the places they settled, the cities they built, and the bloodlines they left behind. In the centuries that followed, the Vikings' descendants would go on to shape the modern world in ways that even they could not have imagined. From the exploration of new lands to the formation of powerful kingdoms, the echoes of the Viking Age can still be felt today. The Viking Age may have come to an end, but the story of the Norsemen is far from over. Their legacy, whether through the enduring presence of Viking descendants in England, Ireland, France, and beyond, or the cultural impact they left on Europe, will continue to fascinate and inspire for generations to come. The Viking Age may have been a chapter in the history of Europe, but it remains an enduring saga of adventure, exploration, and conquest. The Norsemen may have sailed into history, but their story will never be forgotten. As the Viking Age fades into history, one question remains: what is the legacy of the Norsemen? The once feared raiders, explorers, and conquerors left an indelible mark on the world, shaping the cultures, nations, and ideals that would emerge in their wake. Though their era of pillaging and expansion came to an end, the influence of the Vikings would echo through the centuries, from the rise of new kingdoms to the exploration of distant lands. The Vikings were not just warriors. They were craftsmen, traders, and innovators. Their ability to craft longships that could travel across vast distances, even across oceans, revolutionized exploration. With their boats, the Vikings connected regions across Europe, Asia, and North America. These ships weren't just war machines. They were symbols of their adaptability and ingenuity. The craftsmanship behind Viking ships, with their intricate carvings and expert construction, has left behind a legacy of seafaring technology that is still admired today. The material legacy of the Vikings is equally remarkable. Through archaeological digs, we continue to uncover remnants of their world. Viking weapons, tools, jewelry, and even entire towns have been discovered, providing us with an unparalleled glimpse into their daily lives, their skills, and their artistry. The famous Viking treasure hoards found buried beneath the soil tell stories of both wealth and hardship, showcasing their belief in the afterlife and their desire to be buried with their most precious possessions. The Oseberg ship, for instance, unearthed in Norway in 1904, provides one of the most significant insights into Viking culture. This intricately carved vessel, once a burial ship, offers a glimpse into the importance of ships not only for travel and war, but as symbols of prestige, power, and spiritual significance. It is a reminder that the Vikings were deeply connected to their spiritual world, and their burials often reflected their status and beliefs. Beyond the tangible remains, the Vikings' legacy lives on in art, literature, and culture. In the centuries following the Viking Age, their myths, stories, and sagas became part of European folklore. From the great tales of Norse gods and heroes in the poetic Edda to the sagas of Icelandic explorers, the Vikings' rich storytelling tradition has influenced everything from modern fantasy literature to Hollywood films. The modern world continues to be captivated by the Norse mythology. The gods, giants, and creatures of Viking lore have been immortalized in novels, movies, video games, and television series, continuing to captivate the imagination of millions. The very idea of a warrior's code, of honor, bravery, and the pursuit of glory continues to resonate in popular culture today. The Viking legacy also lives on through the people who call Scandinavia home. The Norsemen's descendants continue to celebrate their heritage through festivals, museums, and cultural events. Viking reenactments, where modern-day warriors don the same armor and helmets as their ancestors, are held throughout the Nordic countries. These events are not just a form of entertainment. They are a way to honor the rich, complex history of the Vikings and their impact on the world. Though the Viking Age ended centuries ago, the values of exploration, courage, and adventure remain at the heart of Scandinavian identity. The Viking spirit, embodied in the form of resilience, independence, and boldness, continues to influence the modern world. The Vikings were pioneers in so many ways, and their boldness in seeking out new lands and forging new paths resonates with people today. Yet, for all the glory they achieved, the Vikings were also human, and their legacy is not without its complexities. Their raids were brutal, their conquests ruthless, and their impact on the societies they encountered was often violent. The Viking Age was an era of both triumph and tragedy, of creation and destruction. For every settlement built and every trade route established, there was a burning village, a fallen kingdom, and a shattered society. Still, the story of the Vikings is not one of simple destruction, but one of transformation. Their interactions with the cultures they encountered, from the Anglo-Saxons to the Franks, from the Byzantines to the Slavs, reshaped the very fabric of medieval Europe. The Norsemen were not just invaders, they were agents of change, helping to forge the cultural, political, and social structures that would define the Middle Ages. The Viking Age may have ended, but the impact of the Norsemen continues to ripple through history. They were among the first to challenge the established order of their time, and their audacious journeys and fearless conquests are a testament to the unyielding human spirit. Their legacy is a reminder that even in the face of uncertainty, the desire to explore, to conquer, and to create can shape the course of history. The Viking Age is a story of survival, conquest, and innovation. It's a story that shows us the enduring power of curiosity and the lengths people will go to change the world around them. The Vikings, with their courage and boldness, will forever remain a symbol of adventure and determination. Though the Viking Age has passed, the world they helped shape is still here, and their legacy lives on in the modern nations they helped build, the cultures they influenced, and the myths they left behind. The Viking Age may have ended, but the spirit of the Norsemen lives on. Their saga continues, forever etched in the pages of history. And as long as we remember their tales, the Viking Age will never truly be over.